Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
So I was thinking of doing a sermon about procrastination, but I decided I'd do that next week. Thank you for being an easy audience. So what can we learn from procrastination from Avraham Avinu? Is he not the exemplar of zealous action? After all, we see in this week's Torah portion a section that is probably very familiar to all of us, as it is one of the prominent readings for Rosh Hashanah, the story of the Akedah, the story of the binding and almost sacrifice of Isaac. And in that story, is it not Abraham who rises early, ready to fulfill God's command to sacrifice his son? Is it not Abraham himself who ladens down the donkey with all the supplies and heads out bright and early in that morning? Is it not him who, when they reach the place that God reveals, builds the altar, throws his son on top of it, and nearly kills him? Well, yes, but this is also Abraham who, if we read very carefully, waited until the next morning before he got started. This is also the Abraham who seems to be hesitant about exactly which son are you talking about here, God? Is it this son or that son? Because you know I have two. Having been forced to kick out Ishmael only the chapter before, Abraham still considers him his son. This is indeed the Abraham who hesitatingly talks with his son Isaac as they approach the sacrificial spot, not quite laying out exactly what's going to happen. And while it may seem to a modern reader that Abraham hastily constructs the altar, binds his son, and prepares the slaughter, as far as biblical literature goes, it's rather a lengthy section with many, many phrases and verbs, many more than are necessary to simply say, and he killed him, and he sacrificed him, which would be the normal biblical expression. And so, in fact, it can seem that Abraham is putting this off. Now, which would be more natural? Which would be appropriate? On the one hand, I think most of us can expect that a father asked to sacrifice a child would be naturally hesitant to do this and probably try to procrastinate, put it off as much as possible. And after all, Abraham has good reason to think that maybe he got the message wrong. Maybe he didn't quite understand what God was asking for. After all, God has told him that it will be the son of Isaac that will be his primary heir, that will be the inheritor for the brit, the covenant that God has begun to forge with Abraham. And after all, as mentioned, Ishmael, the spare son, has already been sent away. And so there really isn't a backup plan in place. So could God really mean to sacrifice Isaac? Maybe it would be a good idea to slow walk this process and wait and see exactly what comes of it. Maybe God will come back and we'll have another bargaining session like with Sodom and Gomorrah, and maybe there will be a different way to approach this where I will not have to sacrifice my son. And so each and every step is laid out in agonizing detail to show that Abraham is going as slow as possible. On the other hand, this is the same Abraham whom, when God said, leave your home, leave your family behind, all of your relatives and the place of your ancestors, go off to a new place where it'll be good, trust me, did it. Without argument, without hesitation, he lech, that's the beginning of last week's Torah portion, lech lecha, off you go, and Abraham goes off. And when God tells him to do something, Abraham seems very responsive in order to do so. Why would we read this as being an unnecessary delay? Yes, he took 3 days to get there, but that's because God had not yet revealed the location, and it was a 3 days journey. So Abraham was surely not hesitating in any of this. He knows that God's word is good. He knows that what God has told him must be done. And even if God had promised that it would be the son of Isaac, son of Sarah that would be his inheritor, well, maybe God has changed the rules. So Abraham is sort of an example of both. Somebody who is procrastinating, very unsure of which way to go and whether they want to take care of the task that they have been given, and also somebody who moves with zeal and determination to take care of a task that they have been given. How do we reconcile these two? Well, because Abraham has sechel. Abraham has sense. Not just wisdom, but sense. He recognizes that his understanding of the situation is limited. He has been given mutually contradictory instructions by God, that he should favor Isaac over Ishmael, that Isaac will be the inheritor, and that he should sacrifice Isaac. Neither of these are a problem until they are put together, and then it becomes contradictory. But Abraham is not able to say which one is right or how the two of them can both be fulfilled. But rather than allowing himself to be paralyzed, he does what he can. God says there needs to be a sacrifice, and it needs to be in this place. And Abraham does not remain paralyzed, unmoving, because he doesn't know exactly what will happen next. Instead, he does the preparations that he can. God says that he needs to go somewhere. All right, he'll pack up the donkey. God says there's going to be a sacrifice. Okay, he'll take the tools that are needed for the sacrifice, the knife, the fire, the wood. No problem. And what will happen when they get there? Well, Abraham doesn't have to be sure of that to be sure of what his most immediate next step needs to be. And instead, he gives words that are extremely helpful for all of us. When his son asks him, well, I see that we've got the fire and I see we've got the wood, but what about the lamb for slaughter? Abraham says, God will see to the sacrifice, my son. Beautifully ambiguous phrase in the Hebrew, meaning that either God will prepare a sacrifice, my son, or God will prepare a sacrifice, my son. It all depends on where you put the comma in that sentence. And so Abraham reminds us that sometimes we have to move forward, unsure of where we are headed, unsure of precisely what we will do at our destination, and perhaps unhappy about the prospect of what we might have to do at our destination. But the step right in front of me, that I can be sure of. And the step immediately after that, I can be sure. Abraham is being thoughtful while being active, which is the true antidote to procrastination, to putting off dealing with a difficult subject. Yes, sometimes we need time to think, time to ruminate, time to consider, but that doesn't mean that we do nothing in the meantime. We take what steps we can, and we use what we learn from each of those steps to better understand what will need to be done at the final stage that is causing us such trepidation. Procrastination is paralysis, but it doesn't have to be. We are capable of moving even while being thoughtful. We are capable of continuing to consider and reconsider our direction and our actions even as we move forward. We need not wait until an epiphany of enlightenment shows us precisely what is needed for us and justifies all of our behaviors till the end of the road. All we need is a light on what I have to do tomorrow, what I need to do this week, what I need to do an hour from now. And sometimes focusing on that will help us break free of the prison of indecision, will break free of the worries and quandaries that we have, break free of those shackles of procrastination. And sometimes, once things have begun moving, it turns out when you get to the top of the mountain, there's a ram stuck in the bush. And that would make a much better sacrifice than my son. And clearly, that must be what God was meaning all along. But Abraham never would have encountered that had he remained stuck in his tent, unsure of what to do next. So, please, take a step forward. You know what the next step involves. You may not know where you'll lead in the end, but have the courage to at least take a little step forward and see what you'll think about things from there. Shabbat Shalom.